Well, if it isn't the FIA making last-minute tweaks with little warning yet again. Round 2 in China is on the horizon, just 1 week following Round 1 in Australia, and the FIA have decided to make a pretty big change which surely cannot be acted upon in such short notice. Things are adding up though, as pre-season complaints seem to have been listened to following the McLaren dominance in Round 1, as it would appear that another team has been doing some meddling behind the scenes. It's fair to say that those benefiting from the changes are going to be pretty chuffed, as their teams are gifted a more level playing field, but those being punished are bound to be absolutely furious. Want to know why the FIA have swooped in with massive changes so last minute? Surely it isn't fair, so just why have they been enacted? And stick around, because the perpetrators of the changes may have revealed themselves weeks ago before the season even began, as the dark arts have been employed out of sheer desperation to keep up. So what exactly are the changes that were announced on Monday, and why are they such a big deal? Well, as we all know, the aerodynamic regulations introduced in 2022 called for some pretty creative overhauls that have been developed over the course of the last few years. Some, such as the W13 Zero Pod, were a creative dead end, and as such came under no real scrutiny. Others, however, such as the subject of this week's rule change, McLaren's much-copied wing design, have been far more effective, especially on the right circuits. Anyone that bemoans that F1 wing should not flex full stop is categorically wrong, as body components that do not move at all would shatter and be massively dangerous. Flexing, therefore, is not ultimately banned, as some embittered fanboys may lead you to believe. However, it is something that is rightly regulated. Because of this, the grey area as to what is acceptable in regards to the movement of the bodywork under the forces experienced at 300 km/h is something that comes under a lot of scrutiny, and is often immediately called out as an unfair advantage when things aren't going well for other teams. Because of this, the dominant car at the first round in Australia, the McLaren, seems to have been targeted by a sudden rule change that seems designed to catch them out. The most clear example of what the FIA is looking to clamp down on was at the Azerbaijan Grand Prix last year, as the euphemistically referred to mini DRS generated quite a lot of discussion. Now, this had been something that the teams noticed months before, with engineers at Mercedes being sat down in front of a video of the McLaren wing with instruction to replicate the effect as early as April last year. However, Baku was the most exaggerated example of the front wing's design due to the incredibly long home straight. Clearly, the FIA wanted to quash discussion of this and so enacted more thorough testing. At pre-season testing this year, all cars were pronounced legal by the FIA, and even at Melbourne just the other day, the teams were allowed to compete, having completed the tests during free practice. However, it would appear that upon reflection, the FIA are no longer satisfied that everyone is actually playing by the rules. As has been previously communicated, between the end of the 2024 season and the start of the 2025 season, the FIA exercised the authority it is granted under Article 3.15.1 of the technical regulations to introduce either new or more challenging load deflection tests for the front wing, from Race 9, the Spanish Grand Prix, the upper rear wing, and the beam rear wing. In addition, the FIA requested to the teams to use cameras in free practice sessions to monitor the on-track deformations exhibited by the cars during the Australian Grand Prix. Having analysed the footage from the rear wing deformations combined to the static deflections measured inside the FIA garage in Melbourne, the FIA has concluded that sufficient grounds exist for a tougher test to be introduced from the forthcoming Chinese Grand Prix on the upper rear wing. The FIA wishes to further confirm that during the Melbourne event, all cars were tested against the requirements of Article 3.15.17 and found to comply. Therefore, all cars raced in Melbourne were deemed to be legal. The main teams that were noted by fans and other teams were McLaren, Mercedes and Ferrari. However, it is unclear as to what the punishment will be for teams if there was anything found untoward under the greater scrutiny entailed by the now revised technical directive. It would appear that the revision to the directive, aimed specifically at the upper element of the rear wing, is the much-discussed TD018 being expedited and rushed forwards in reaction to the opening round in Melbourne. As it was, the fact that the rule changing was decided to come into effect at the 9th round of the Championship, the Spanish Grand Prix in Barcelona, was a pretty controversial decision, with the most vocal critic being Red Bull team boss Christian Horner, who bemoaned the decision at the pre-season launch event. The front wing gets changed at race 9. Why 9? I don't know, but it is what it is. It's the same for everyone. It just means that you've got a pre-race 9 and a post-race 9 set of issues to deal with, which inevitably will drive cost. Which is certainly a fair complaint. What isn't fair, however, is the flag post being moved with only 4 days notice before the cars hit the track and only 3 days before the media day in China, with no real chance afforded to the team in order to create revised components if they cannot meet with the new testing criteria demanded by the FIA. Fred Vasseur, before the season started, indicated that the entire roadmap that was laid out for Ferrari had been dictated in large part due to the mid-season change, with a front wing change being anticipated to come anyway at some point, now being targeted for the round 9 change, saying, "For me, it's not an issue. I think it's good to have clarity. The most important for me is to know that we have to change something on the front wing by Barcelona, for example. You can discuss about the timing because it's the week after Monaco and we need to come to Monaco with a full package of front wing, but at the end of the day, it's good for us. It's good for the development and planning to know when we have to bring something. The worst case scenario would be to start the season like we are today, and in 2 races to come with a TD to change something because it's much more difficult to plan, and in this case, it would have been a mess. But honestly, we all know the situation. We are planning on bringing an upgrade for the front wing during the season, and like this, we know that we'll have to do it back in Barcelona." And now, the pre-season, well at least we have notice, has now turned into that is due by this Friday and will now likely cause the mess that Fred Vasseur thought the FIA was avoiding. The sudden change will have sent some teams reeling, and while it may not be a word-for-word advance of the changes expected in Barcelona, if anyone is found wanting, then the changes that could have been detected as necessary back in testing if people cared to pay attention will have massive implications on the season ahead. So that brings into question, why now? Well, that appears to be because Red Bull doubled down on their prior complaints about the McLaren aero work being an unfair advantage, despite their consistent passing of the FIA's tests, with Red Bull technical director Pierre Wash claiming that Ferrari and McLaren in particular were doing the mini DRS stuff still. The complaints of Red Bull have been consistent, but it would appear that the pressure exerted by the team alongside the new recordings captured at the Melbourne Grand Prix has pushed the governing body to enact immediate changes. Now, I don't know about you, but a car that has been deemed legal constantly suddenly having the benchmark moved, having an impact on the outcome of the championship, would feel pretty cheap to me. The complaints will certainly have credibility to them, and Red Bull are right to try and seek leverage in order to close the very apparent gap between themselves and McLaren that was demonstrated in the opening round of the season. But the fact that the FIA have acted so suddenly and hastily feels incredibly unprofessional, and something that surely could have been decided on based on the footage at preseason testing. The feud between the two teams risks getting nasty this year, especially with the team principals trading jibes in the media. Ever since Red Bull seemingly got away with massively breaching the cost cap earlier this decade, Zak Brown has made it clear that he views his team as being at odds with the Red Bull team and in particular Christian Horner's character. When asked if the beef between the two was genuine, Brown replied, "Oh, it's genuine. There is no love lost there. I don't like how he rolls, and no doubt he feels the same about me, but I think it's good for the sport. You need different characters. You need these rivalries. Some are friendly sporting rivalries, some are a bit more vicious. It's always been like that." The extent to which the two will butt heads this season will depend on if Red Bull can catch up with McLaren on track, but for the time being, Red Bull seem to be satisfied with taking the battle to the boardroom, as their pressure on the FIA finally pays off. Thank you for watching.